Hello my dear friends, and welcome back to another video. So here we are, New Year's Eve, the last day of 2022, and in today's video, along with some Star Wars news updates, we're also going to jump on the Star Wars speculation train as well. So no more jibber jabber, it's going to be a great time, let's dive straight into this. Yesterday we got a new poster, this one for Wrecker, but we also had an update from Jennifer Corbett, who, speaking with Games Radar, confirmed something very disappointing, that Boba Fett will not be appearing or crossing paths with Omega in Season 2. This was something a lot of fans were hopeful for, but it doesn't seem to be in the cards, unless of course she's playing coy. This is what was revealed. Do not expect Boba to cross paths with Omega anytime soon. Jennifer Corbett says that the young bounty hunter and the Batch will not be meeting this season. Where Boba Fett is in this moment is a very different path to Omega. They're on different journeys at the moment. But despite Boba's absence, she reassured fans not to worry, and confirmed that Season 2 will devote plenty of time to fleshing out Omega both as a character and a clone of high importance, and there are other surprises coming, so we're not really going to miss Boba Fett. She says, quote, "We definitely continue with learning about Omega's background. And here's the big one, guys, the reasons why she was with the cloners Nala Se and Lama Su on Kamino in the first place. And we will talk about them in just a moment, but the Batch don't care what she is. She says all they see her as is their sister." Jennifer Corbett also implied there's a connection between Nala Se being recruited by the Empire and what goes on later in the timeline in The Mandalorian Season 2. And this is something I talked about a long time ago, that what's going on Mount Tantiss eventually connects to what Moff Gideon is up to, what Dr. Pershing's up to, Palpatine's contingency, and the eventual rise of Snoke. They say that while Boba Fett doesn't appear in The Bad Batch, Season 2's trailers confirm a number of great cameos. This is from past Clone Wars episodes, but also connections to other elements of the Star Wars universe, including the trilogies. There are a few surprises, and the reviewers did say some characters who appear you never saw coming. Now, over the last few days, guys, we've had a few TV spots. We had one called Freedom, we had Team, Mission, and the latest one doesn't contain any new footage, so we're not going to go through it. But while I covered those over the last few days, there's a lot of anticipation in the fandom for what Season 2 is doing. Fans are anticipating the return of Cody, the next chapter of Omega's story, what's next for Crosshair, the return of Gungi and maybe some other Jedi, and not to mention the subplot on Mount Tantiss, which, as I just mentioned, I believe connects to later in the timeline in the Mandoverse. And while fans are generally excited for these big characters and stories, there's one thing I can't stop wondering about: the fate of the surviving Kaminoans. Jennifer Corbett just said, "We will find out why Omega was created, why she was there with Nala Se, but I also want to know what happened to the other Kaminoans. In Season 1 we saw Lama Su die, Torn Wei, and a handful of other scientists, and Nala Se was taken to Wayland. She's going to return in Season 2, but what about other Kaminoans? There were so many of them. In canon we know there are still others out there, but where did they go? Did the Empire take them to work on Wayland as well, or did they eliminate them?" My mind goes to the Andor series, where we learn through Gorst that the Empire did mass purges and horrific experiments on various species across the galaxy. And since the Kaminoans were spread out in the Kamino system and beyond, did the Empire imprison or genocide them? I'm genuinely curious, because unlike other species that the Empire targeted for their own power, the Kaminoans would be seen as an asset. They were highly intelligent and scientifically advanced, which you'd think would be seen as an advantage to the Imperial regime. But what would happen to them by the time of The Mandalorian? Did they work for the Imperial Remnant? Who knows? In War of the Bounty Hunters, which takes place just before Return of the Jedi, there is one Kaminoan on Tatooine, and much later in the timeline during the sequel era, in the Poe Dameron comics, we see a rebel Kaminoan called Kanbei. So there were a few around, but they were significantly rare. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed the Bad Batch Season 2 shows us what happened to the rest of them. It's very mysterious we don't hear much of them following the prequel trilogy. And yes, Topoka City was destroyed, but we know that wasn't the only location of Kaminoan residency. And as I've pointed out in the past, Nala Se is the biggest threat to Omega in Season 2, because Omega used to work under her, and the Empire might decide the female member of Clone Force 99 is an essential asset for the cloning project to continue. This is something Jennifer Corbett is teasing. Very exciting stuff, guys. 4 days to go, and I'm sure on Monday we will have another kind of TV spot or trailer. And so now, my dear friends, another update by Collider for Andor Season 2. The headline, "They're all going to die, aren't they?" Basically a speculative piece which asks the question, apart from Andor who dies in Rogue One, what about the other characters? Are we going to see the majority of them die? We know some of them won't, like Mon Mothma, who's going to survive well into the New Republic era, but what about others like Luthen and Bix? Well, in previous interviews, Tony Gilroy, being candid and upfront, said that Bix is one of the characters who doesn't die in Season 2, but he does say more tragedy is to come. We were all surprised in Season 1 following the heist on Aldhani just how many characters perished, especially Nemik, whose manifesto would have such a huge impact on the Rebel Alliance. But will more characters die? This is an inherent issue that many prequels face when the audience is well aware of the end results, especially in this case Jyn Erso, Saw Gerrera, and Cassian Andor. And the entire series so far has been an exercise in answering the question, if we already know a character's fate, are they worth investigating? Well, I think the answer is yes. The Star Wars prequels being a great example. We know where all those characters end up, but it's still worth seeing the story unfold. And you might say there's a sense of inevitability that haunts the entire Andor series. It's a Star Wars project exclusively for adults, so they're not as afraid to kill people off, and kill them off in a very violent way. We saw a lot of tragedy in Season 1 with Marva, Nemik, you name it, a lot of our heroes died. There are of course open-ended fates, like what happened to Kino Loy, but are we going to see more heroes fall in Season 2? Well, this is a question that in the past, Diego Luna and Tony Gilroy was somewhat reluctant to answer, but they do seem to hint that more heroes have to fall by the time of Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and I think the likes of Vel, and maybe some new faces in Season 2 with the Rebel Alliance, are going to be part of that. And it all adds up to the big theme of unseen sacrifice in this show. The rebellion was not just the big heroes, it wasn't just Luke and Leia and Han, there were all these sacrifices years before. The everyday people who made the difference, the little people who rose up against the powers of the Empire and, as Nemik said, tried. And one character whose fate we all want to know about is Luthen Rael. Does he survive the events of Andor, or does he die before the events of Rogue One? It really is impossible to tell, because Andor shows us that heroes are not perfect beings, they have to do terrible things in the name of rebellion. Luthen is one example, Cassian is another. He's the kind of guy who sets up others for death, but he himself always seems to escape. Is that going to be the case, and if so, could he re-emerge later on in the timeline? Are there bigger plans for him? And of course, in the case of Cassian Andor himself, the titular character, he only dies at the end of Rogue One, so he of course makes it to the end of the Andor series. Same with Melshi and others who also appear in the 2016 movie, but with a lot of these characters, it's simply open-ended. Let me know in the comments down below which characters you think will not make it to the end of Andor Season 2. It'll be interesting to see who you choose. Share your thoughts of this in the comments down below, guys. If you enjoyed today's news update, please be sure to give me a big fat thumbs up, subscribe if you're new, and if you want more videos not found here on YouTube, while also getting your name at the end of my videos, then click the link down there in the description. But with that said, guys, that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, Happy New Year, and I can't wait to create more content for you starting tomorrow. May the Force be with you always.